thank you all so much for coming. My name is Spencer Williams. I am the founder and lead editor at The Art of Costume, where we celebrate the work of costume designers and everyone on costume crews, illustrators. We celebrate all of you every day. So thank you so much for everything that you do. And with that, I just want to say too, being a part of this industry, to say it's a little bit of a roller coaster ride would be an understatement with global pandemics and strikes. But at the end of the day, it's so wonderful to have you all here. You have this beautiful community. You look out for each other, you support each other, and we're going to get through this together. So give yourself a round of applause for being here. Now, I am so pleased to introduce the legend sitting right next to me. You will know her for her work on some brilliant films such as Edge of Tomorrow, Suicide Squad, Mortal Engines, and my favorite, Crimson Peak. I'll see.
Dying for a dress in red, aren't you?
She is the recipient of 2 CDGA nominees. I am talking about the legendary costume designer, Kate Hawley.
Makes me sound like I'm dead and buried.
Well, Kate, thank you so much for coming all the way from New Zealand. This is pretty cool.
Yeah, because this world gets madder and madder in the work, and we jump higher and higher. And I've chosen a little place that's not unlike the Shire, in the middle of nowhere. And I think it's really important for all of us to find a place where we can dream. And that's why I choose that. It's a little harder for commuting, but...
I'm so jealous right now.
It'll be open for workshops at some point.
Yeah. Well, let's start with there, actually. New Zealand is so synonymous with Lord of the Rings. Peter Jackson filmed The Lord of the Rings there. The Hobbit, Amazon's The Lord of the Rings of Power was also filmed there. So take me back to the moment when now you're the costume designer on this incredible project. Yeah. Is it like, oh my God, I'm so excited? Are you terrified? All of the above?
Oh my God, terrified, rather than oh my God, excited. Yeah, I think so. All of those things, and you always have that initial dream of, oh, fantastic, and then reality sets in, with real things like budgets, But it's always exciting, and you always come initially with all your own thoughts. I read the books when I was 12. Like a lot of kids, driving through the countryside, you imagined the worlds and of that world, and maybe this could happen here or in front of you. I spent a lot of my childhood dreaming, and failing and at school and things. But I think you come with that initial idea, and then you learn, like all these projects, then it's a process of who you're working with and how things develop. So you have what you bring, and then the actors and the director, of course, and the vision becomes a process. So it's quite an interesting thing. But yes, all of those very real thoughts of terrified and excited.
Well, it worked out.
Yeah.
So it's The Lord of the Rings, so there is a lot of subject matter.
Yeah.
How did you approach this in terms of research? Were you reading the books? There's also a lot of art forms out there inspired by Tolkien's work. Where do you begin with this?
Well, I think I begin with a process like I do with every project that I start. I started in theatre, and I went to a school called Motley Theatre Design, and it taught me a really great structure of process and supporting the actors and always coming back to the script. And in this case, when I started, we didn't have a script, but we had the source material, and I was very familiar with Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit. But of course, I revisited and read those books. And then what I hadn't discovered or read, because it felt too hard, a bit like the Bible back in the day, was the Silmarillion. And then we all started, all my crew had read all the books, but we all started reading the Silmarillion and totally geeking out on that. It's such a different, elemental, fierce world, and by reading the books and understanding, we're all familiar with the Third Age, which is Lord of the Rings, but it's a world of 3 ages. So to even begin, which is quite daunting when you think of all the cultures, and that was to try and achieve the big broad arcs and strokes first, which started in, what are these people in the First Age, where are they born and who are they of, and where do they end up in the Third Age? So each age had its own rules and elements. The Third Age is the fading of magic and the time of man, and the Second Age is where all magic is happening, and the trees give the light instead of taking the light. So you start pinning big markers on your board, and then we get into Tolkien itself and all his works and all his writings, and particularly the way he describes elves and things in the Silmarillion, and born under the stars and on shores of pearl, and his heroes are covered in the dust of diamonds, and his work is so writing is so poetic, I used that as my reference. So words went up on the wall and phrases, and then you realise that all his elements in the world is strongly resonated in the world of nature. So each culture, from his descriptions in his own words, became my reference points for inspiration. So each culture ended up having their own materials and elements. With the elves, it was pearls and diamonds and and light, about reflecting light, the stars in the sky and the water and things. And the dwarves had the fires of Hawley and their god in their eyes and things. And also, as part of that other level of research, he was, constantly inspired by the Norse mythologies and the Germanic mythologies. And I knew a lot about those worlds, having worked in opera in that world with, Siegfried and the Nibelung. So that was a big reference point. And I knew that European sensibility. We've got to remember that this is sort of a world that comes from that world, but there's the Green Man, the English folklore, and Sir Arthur and the Green Knight and all of that.
Just
world.
A few different things to reference.
And then there's the paintings of the period. There's Edward Burne-Jones and all of that. So all of this went into the mix, and we distilled it. And I had a room. We had what we call the war room, because there was a lot of secrecy around the project. And how do I engage my crew and people who didn't have access to scripts and things? It was all done from it was a very special thing that Amazon were trying to keep there, but I still had a job to try and communicate that and share that so my crew knew the direction. So we set up this war room, and we had tables, and the writings went on the wall, and then the next layer of stuff went on, and then we had jewels or samples of chainmail that we were creating. So every world started to form around us in culture. So the actors who came in, who often didn't know what was going to happen to them, as some of us, but we could create all of these so they could engage and see how they fitted into the overall world.
Wow.
And then we went into detail after that.
Wow. So it's just a short little few-week process.
Well, it helps if you get lost, because these projects get faster and faster. I know most of you will have had this experience that the pace of things get faster. We're asked to do things in even shorter time, and technology is often used as the sort of, but you've got this so we can move faster. But trying to hang on to things, and especially in a world that's about craft and that, all the cultures that have a certain amount of craft and the hand is present. So trying to work out, I've made this a huge answer, I'm going to stop.
No.
But
You're killing it. So how many of you have read The Lord of the Rings? It's just, okay.
Did you get past the first 100 pages?
Yeah, that was more than I thought. How many
my
of you,
mother said that. She said, if you can get through the first 100 pages, you'll be fine. And then it was like magic. Yeah.
How many of you have read the Silmarillion? That's a quiz. Okay, 2, 3,
There's
4.
some lovely, there's some lovely audio books with beautiful music, and
She said audiobooks.
Well, sometimes it's hard. It's like it's Shakespeare when he tackles the Silmarillion. And it's sort of, you have to think of it again instead of analysing every sentence. You look at the broad strokes, and I think Tolkien's, I don't know if we're always successful, but the atmosphere he creates is so amazing, and the poetry of the atmosphere, and a lot of those things you walk in and my vision's always clouded and mist. It's always mist, conveniently shrouding figures, and that wasn't always the case, because in this case our showrunners wanted to show it in its glory of the sun and all of that world, not so shrouded in mist. So all my sketches were sort of things vaguely coming through the mist.
Yeah.
But like Crimson Feet, everything was the back of a character. So sometimes you discover something in the way you're drawing or realizing these things.
Wow,
So,
I love it. I'm obsessed. So just short answer, how many questions do you think you guys created on this project?
Questions? Or costumes?
Costumes. Did I say questions?
We created lots of
How
questions.
many questions, costumes did you do?
I think it was over 2,000, but sometimes we'd have 4 weeks to build, say, like the dwarven culture, and so we had the normal stresses. I think Galadriel's little night dress thing that she, the undergown that she wore in the ocean, there was probably about 80 versions of that. And we did tests. I was lucky enough, we were renting a lovely house, thank you Amazon again, in Auckland. And I had a little swimming pool, and I remember getting these lovely girls who were the stunt girls. We spent weekends at mine, sort of, drink by the pool and then get her in the night dress and just see how it worked underwater. And we were taking shots underwater to try and make it like La Leak. There were all these things that we've seen, you didn't always see it, but it was about how the fabric, we had to do different gowns that reacted to chlorine, colour, length, whatever the stunt work was doing. So a simple garment like that became an insane
Many,
amount
many
of work.
gowns.
Yeah, exactly. And you can go, oh, I just want a lovely little thing of pearls around the edge, but then when you're multiplying that and the handwork, it has an impact.
Wow.
So, you know.
Well, what I love about the Rings of Power is that, like you mentioned, there's so many different cultures. There's the Harfoots, there's the elves, there's the dwarves, there's the orcs. I mean, we could fill probably the next 3 hours talking about every single costume. So I kind of just want to touch on the different cultures, starting with my favorite, the Harfoots. I think they're so adorable. Love them.
They're not. They're horrible.
They're very, I would say, influenced by nature, you know, because their whole thing is hiding. I mean, if you watch a show, they just disappear. So they really have to blend into their environment. So what was your concept behind the Harfoots, and how did you make them disappear?
Well, the big concept was, of course, you know, where do we end up in this world? And they're not the same race. There's a bunch of different hobbity-like.
Do you want to get into it? So they're not hobbits.
There's, you know,
they're great,
not
great,
big
great.
feet either, but there's, you know, the whole range of them. Oh, and we're not in the fat little contented sort of world that we meet them in the Shire. These are more nimble, more like, I liken them more to rabbits, or, you know, sort of those cute, what are those mice that run across deserts?
Okay,
you know, but they're much
rats.
more light. You know, they're and also I think of them in the Ark as more our sort of pagan forebears. You know, there's sort of an element of our humanity in them. You know, the Hobbit's almost like the common man in the world of, you know, there are, you know, the nearest thing to how we are in the Shire for sure. And
I read that you were inspired by just walking through the mountains. And kind of
I think that's slightly. I've got this horrible picture of myself like Julie Andrews gone wrong. So I just came. I was like, oh my God. But it could be worth a try. More like Midsummer Murders by the time I do it. Yeah. It's like, well, their journey was through the mountains. I'm more of a leisure sports kind of girl.
It's a brisk walk through the mountains.
So, I mean, they're nomadic. So we start off with that because there's a big journey over, you know, several series, I guess. So, you know, they sat between that line between the mountain and the tree line, and it was we started off looking at nomadic stuff in general, you know, with the Tibetan nomads or just even Scottish peat, you know, dwellers. And there was all sorts of references that came in there, but it was mostly about the whole of Middle Earth at this point is transient. You know, their cultures are displaced, and we sit between two major wars in the world of Tolkien, which is the War of the Silmarils and War of the Rings. And we're right at the beginning, and, you know, dwarves and orcs have gone underground, but these people, everyone's sort of looking for a home, and that's part of the big story of them. And when I was relating everything back to folklore and Tolkien's world and influences in that, we were sort of I was looking at a lot of stuff with harvest and pagan. They're a group that have their rituals and superstitions in their journey. And there was a whole thing about, you know, the passing, very dark little moment of the passing of other souls that never made it, and rituals like apple seeds replace rosaries, and, you know, the adornment was also a practical thing for camouflage. There was one series of images that I did which was just, you know, a series of women cloaked. You know, that the idea was that it wasn't what it ended up in the series of a more, I suppose, literal way of hiding, but the idea that you could just be sitting like a wild animal in the landscape, and when they think they're being watched, their stillness makes them hide in the environment. So we choose colours and vegetable dyes and things that they stain their hands, and, you know, we're part of that. And their green plaids, we made up little clan plaids for each family that went into the carts, and this is a bit geeky, you know, all of that stuff. But just the idea that you could wrap yourself in the cloak, or that the adornment in your hair could make you part of that world, and then it became an idea that got bigger. So JD and Patrick going, and then when we get to this location, we want different hair things. And I was like, we've set ourselves a big task.
All right, take
but
it easy.
Also helped with scale. You know, we're always dealing with normal, in our wonderful breadth of what normal is. You know, we're dealing with humans, and we're trying to scale them into more humanoid size. So using these head things also, you know, we're working in TV. We don't have the luxury of the time frame that you might get in film with prosthetics and that. And how do we create that illusion of the small scale? So they helped create a proportional thing, but also we made all these sculpted in our department, all these blackberries and acorns and things that you'd find around. And then we you do on these tables, we'd have scales of 1 to 10 of different size acorns. When's an acorn too big, to be stupid? And when does it read? And actually what I learned from that
acorn is not going to work.
And I had this wonderful dialogue with visual effects, because they're very technical, and I love that department. They were very technical, it's all got to be planned and this. And I went, oh my God, it's a bit like Heel of the Valley and Eye of the whatever, it's what visually works in the end. And you all know that by looking at something, it either just works or it doesn't. And there's a point where it, so in the end I was more instinctive with those sort of things when it came to scale. Things like pattern and that were more technical, but for them it was scale. But I did lots of drawings of naked little half-foots bathing in streams that got, no, I did. But the point is you're offering, and your job is to offer ideas and also learn to let go, of your lollies. We had lots of ideas that we sketched up, and they were often we used, but sometimes they're taken and developed into something else, or someone go, I love that idea, and you go, oh, it wasn't quite what I intended, but then it becomes something else, and that's part of the journey. And that, so.
Wow, you went on a journey alongside them, bringing them to life.
Yeah, and it's a collaboration, which is, I have to forget it's not not just about us. So, there's a lot to factor into that. Yeah.
Well, speaking of journeys, I think it'd be so exciting to journey to Casa Doom to talk about the Dwarven Kingdom.
Yeah.
I'm trying not to get too nerdy. I'm like, what?
What does that mean? Not too nerdy.
You should have saw what I was wearing this morning. It was a lot.
I wish he had.
So talking about the dwarves, when you think of dwarves, of course, they're very dirty. They're always mining, which, but that's not all they're about. It's partially true, but their colors are also very rich and materials, a lot of golds.
Yeah, and well, like the elves are literally in their golden age. And, when we've seen their world in the films of the trilogy and in the books of Lord of the Rings, it's Moria and Khazad-dûm, which is being decimated, and it's a place of death. It's one giant
graveyard.
Pretty much. And when you read Gimli's descriptions and that, it's covered in jewels and that, and it's not as hefty as all that. Their work is supremely fine considering their physiognomy, and they're more humanoid creatures, but the work he talks about the light, and to think of Khazad-dûm as a place of light was a really unusual thing. But then the dwarves, the more you got into the culture, they're more mysterious than other races. They've got all these secrets within layers and that's something that I learnt from the world of the Nibelung and that world. And so we had to build up a whole culture, not just Princess Disa and Durin, but visual effects had to do all these wonderful, big, massive extensions. And you go, well, now we've got to fill it with people. And but suddenly dwarves were gardeners or as well as miners, and we had priests that we created. We created all these things that could be drawn on in their
expanded the culture.
Yeah,
it was very one note before. I mean, all respect, but we really created a whole new world that we all, I think, fell in love with.
Well, and we totally like with again grounding them in their natural elements. Stone and water. And the idea of gold brushing off the mines onto their clothes, or the fire and cinders from the anvils. I think it might answer one of your other questions about breakdown, but the idea that that's part of, not that I know that one.
We could talk about all day long.
But that you're using all of those things to also create part of your palette and that. And I think one of the biggest things when they talked about their god, Hawley, these figures were created in the Silmarillion, they were created out of stone or clay, and Hawley run ahead to get ahead with the beings to create a Middle Earth. Everyone was having a little bit of a competition. And one of the other gods said, we're not ready for those yet because my elves are first. You have to put them away. So he put them to sleep for a while. The elves were born, and then the dwarves were allowed to come out. So they always have a chip on their shoulder. So knowing these ancient sort of histories and quirks with all of this was sort of important. But one of the biggest inspirations of that was just the fire of from the fires of Hawley reflected in their eyes, and that was used in Disa with her eye contacts. All part of hair and makeup and all of those things. So
wow.
Yeah. And I wanted to deal with stone in a way that was different from hard shapes that we were more familiar with, but creating a more organic response to stone. When you see water washing off stone, it's actually very smooth and it's got different shapes, but it's trying to find something that still felt true to the language, but was offering something a little bit different. And it's hard taking on a language like this when you see that language then becomes in World of Warfare and all these other things. So how do you go back to a source? And in general, we tried to keep it to a more classical age. We're in a sort of more classical period. So,
Well, speaking of warfare, I love the dwarven armor. It's very interesting.
Took a lot of time.
Yeah, I bet. That's what we're
Small
getting to.
scale and big.
So let's use Prince Durin, actually,
Yeah.
the Dwarvish king, as an example, played by Owain Arthur, who's brilliant.
Yeah.
His physicality, I think, was very important.
Yeah.
You did little notes to kind of, I don't know, make him the prince, but I saw it throughout all the dwarves also. And we have to talk about those shoes that have the little dwarvish boots that have the 5 toes on it. Those are good.
Well, it was quite funny because, again, I always thought of I'd done a little bit of work on dwarves before, and also with Guillermo when we were concepting on his version of The Hobbit. And, it's starting with the physicality first. So, for him, I drew lots of naked dwarves. Just said it was a bit hard looking up on the internet.
I'm sensing a trend here with your sketches.
Don't look up naked dwarves on the internet. It's a bit of a minefield. But that's one of the things I learned from him is working from the inside out. So and sometimes when you get stuck, you might move from a mannequin to something else. But with him, I learned to sort of look at the characters from their physicality out, and so what was a dwarven physicality and proportional thing. So we started with that. So I had in my mind a sort of heavy set kind of Prince Durin, and then Owain danced into the room. He didn't stomp into the room. He literally came in and was like pirouetted, and he spent all his time on his tippy toes. And I went, what the hell is this?
Whoa,
like, wow, that's not dwarven. But actually, it completely shifted the way I work. And he was so purely, he was cast perfectly. Owain is Durin. And so you start to, it's another example of, as a costume designer, meeting your actor, you might have your thoughts and then meeting them and changing and adapting with that. But the boots were an idea of trying to describe, we didn't have a lot of time to do a huge amount of prosthetics and things in this timeline. We didn't have hours, and I think, we certainly couldn't start from 4 o'clock in the morning to whatever. So, we worked on what can we do with, casting was a huge part, and how does that get enhanced with nose and ear elements. There was a lot of proportional exercises done with that. But the feet, it was because we were more in a classical world, I was looking at footwear on statues and things, and we found some wonderful statues from the Nordic world and that were an inspiration. And sometimes statues are quite cool because they have an abstract form in themselves. So that was an unusual discovery. I ended up using a lot of statues. Except they move. These guys move. So it's like, oh, that drapery didn't work. But the footwear was something, a way of describing the physiognomy underneath, and then it sort of became externalized. So they're quite gnarly feet. They're not dainty little things that you see on there. And, it was sort of just trying to find other languages that sort of reflected that specific culture with him. And he's a prince that hasn't sort of taken on the mantle of a more serious world yet. So.
Right. You touched a little bit on the collaboration with the actors, which is so important to what you all do. I want to use Sofia Nomvetti, who, as an example, who plays Princess Diza. She cited actually the relationship between you two and how crucial it was to developing her character, how you worked on the length of her dress, and also she was a new mother at the time too. So your role really was crucial in this moment.
I think she was cast as she hadn't even given birth at that point. So she came as a new mother, and I think I've been in that position of understanding, there's a lot going on, a lot of change going on, and I think the normal response was to be, dwarven women are, ugly, but I didn't, in the eyes of their men, they're certainly not. And Sophia is so her character anyway. It was always important to go, we want to love the character. It doesn't matter who you are. Certainly doesn't matter what colour you are. We had a lot of issues. She got a lot of disgusting responses out there. But, at the end we went, what is best for the character, and how do we make you so believable as the character? And she's a gorgeous woman and has warmth and fierceness and sexiness, but it all came from, the classical sort of period with the tunics and that. Right. And we made a feature of her. She's got these luscious legs, and so the dwarves and legs of a dwarven woman was something lovely. It was nice not to cover them up, because we had to deal with, instead of using proportional things and padding, we used the shape of the cut of things and that to sort of deal with that a little bit more and to expose the body more. It was opportunity to do that instead of covering it up with fat suits and
Right.
things. And
'Cause this is a big
actually
moment.
have shape,
We've
you know?
never really seen dwarvish women before in The Lord of the Rings, not that I could remember. So I feel like this was a big moment to make this character exciting to
She
someone
had
that
some
we
special
all.
little hairs on her leg too.
I love it.
And all of those things went through processes and many drawings and concepts, and then they're offered up to the showrunners and the actors, and then they become another thing. So, there was a lot of work explored in that world.
Right. Well,
and the hairstyles. And
I'm so excited to talk about the orcs. I'm a big orc nerd. They also been haunting.
Why do you like orcs?
They're so cool. They're scary. They've been haunting my nightmares for some reason. They're like showing up to Pasadena, breaking my doors down. But I'm obsessed with them. So first, I want to talk about how are you developing their costume? Because there's a lot of different pieces, and I wouldn't say any orc looks the same. And then I think this also brings us to my favorite subject, which is the breakdown of costumes. She's like, uh-oh.
So no, I love breakdown. I have one many a time. In the world of, again, quoting the Third Age and Lord of the Rings, and that you're dealing with cohesive armies. They've become a different thing. But in the age that we're in, we're reflecting more the First Age and their journey to the Second Age. And they're a lost, displaced people, just like our Harfoots are, and even the elves are looking for a home, a permanent home. Linden's only a temporary home. So there's that we know about them. And then there's the sort of evolution in that state between half elf and orc and all of those. I thought of them a lot as fallen angels when I was, that was my big image. And, there was discussed that they'd run underground and living in holes and sort of scattered, and they were trying to draw their people together. And when you read the stories of the Silmarillion, which was such a great resource in terms of knowing where all these things had come from, dragons at the time were more like worms. They were wingless creatures, and we had eagles and all of this sort of world. So I tried to always bring in those elements, going, oh, well, maybe we'll just build an eagle if we don't see one in the show, as you do as costume designers. And so we used the idea of shed skins, because it also worked with the fallen angel imagery, and we created, our department had big moulding departments. All the props and armour people made these moulds and sculpted giant lizard skin and things like that, and then they were made in latex. So we fished out all of this stuff and then started creating clothes. We used bone a lot. There were horse masks that we sculpted. They'd rid Middle-earth of horses. We don't see any horses until the new Minorians come back. Galadriel, I keep using her code name, Elendil, or number 3. People go, which one? I go, number 3. And so we used those sort of elements, and that created a sort of, the idea was to create a sort of Boschian nightmare in places with it. And we even concepted what I haven't understood before in this process is that orcs have a birth from a mother, not from a magic sack of whatever. So they're very not unlike humans, and I guess so it was trying to put some more of the humanity. And Regent had designed dwarf children, and I had a lactating mother orc, which is a bit too disgusting, but yeah. So and it was trying to offer real characters in that, and we had lots of different layers, because the boys got really excited, and suddenly they were digging orcs, and there were, this sort of orc, and so they all had different roles within this sort of hive-like community and that. So it was imbuing them with character just like anything else. And we had to play between using stunt people and prosthetics, and I know at one point with timelines and that, prosthetics ran out of time to sort of build all those suits, but we even created latex bodysuits ourselves and printed them and did that. So we used lots of cheats and latex clothing over. So once the element idea of shedding skin, then we could use that in clothing in general, and use the latex quite diligently and come up with things for boots and, where the seam lines come and that, because I wanted to, it's very difficult sometimes when you're working, not difficult, the challenge when you're working with prosthetics is sometimes their lines stop in certain places, and I didn't want, because some of them were really vulnerable and just wearing a nothing but a little wee dinky orc shift. I wanted to not hide and have a bit of bum showing or whatever. Sorry, bottom. So we created garments and did it ourselves so that we weren't compromising what we saw all the time, because there's nothing worse than having a line of t-shirts because you're hiding prosthetic lines and that. So there was a lot of technical challenges and that, but then the crew had some fun, and they were sort of, we were building helms from different ages and from old battlefields, and helms from Alan Lee's drawings. There's a lot of stuff that we took from Alan Lee's world. Some of the orc stuff's quite close to some of his drawings and that. So it was sort of a process of experiment. Nothing was wasted and everything was used.
Wow.
So,
yeah, that's a great way to explain it. They're using bones, they're using helmets, they're using, looks like armor from people that aren't with us anymore.
It's a lot of that. A lot of waste in Middle Earth.
Well, I want to turn to the island of Numenor, which is west of Middle Earth.
What about Breakdown?
Oh, you want to go? I know we're a little behind time. Do we have a little extra?
Carry on.
Or? Yeah, okay. Well, let's go to Breakdown.
No, we can do both. We can do both. But I like Breakdown more than Numenor.
Okay, let's do Breakdown.
I suppose in this world, Breakdown became part of the palette and part of the language of elements and that too. So wherever we use Breakdown as with the hobbits and that, it was the soot, Harfoots, the soot fires, or we had the gold leaves of linden working up Galadriel's dress. We actually used bit of aging more in the process with the elves, especially in the Northern Waste with all the chainmail that was created in that, because we actually wanted to show that it had been 1,000 years. In some ways elves are perfect, but it doesn't mean they're not into the hip, shabby chic. But there's an enjoyment of age and beauty and appreciating that, and that doesn't mean everything's perfect all the time. So we did actually play with that as an idea with the chainmail. It was purposely broken down gently because of that. And, with orcs and things, there was the rust and the mud and all of that crept up. So Breakdown was used in a very painterly, we were very painterly with it. And we did lots and lots of tests with lighting and things. And of course, nothing was like that on the day. You go, oh, we've got this sorted. We've got the right level of stuff. And we went really heavy on it. But with all these new digital cameras, and even with sound, now they're going, oh, that's too loud. And we're going, but your technology has outreached the sound of silk. I don't know how to dampen that down anymore. So it's an interesting thing how, Breakdown and all of those things, how we move on with that too.
Right. So nothing went on set without being touched a little bit.
A lot of it was touched, and then a lot of response was, it doesn't look broken down. But honestly, the photos we took of stuff before it went in and the tests that we did, but it's part of the process. Things, you get on set and the lighting changes, and we all know that. And so you can only do what you can do and keep learning from it. We didn't always have privy to it's a luxury to be able to get rushes and things like that these days when you're running. So it's part of that ongoing journey.
Everything went through a journey.
Yeah.
So do you want to go to Numenor now?
We can do Numenor.
Yeah, all right. So picture this. We're set. So Numenor is very rich. Everything's very golden, but also they love the sea. Everything has like a scale texture to it. So I was wondering what your research and inspirations were behind the island of Numenor.
Well, they're gods. It comes back to their creation. They actually have a link in the first stage with the elves. They fought on the side with the elves. Men. There were two groups of men at the time, and men were divided. So the king's men fought with the elves, and the others, which are the sort of Teherad, fought on the dark side, and they're never allowed to forget it. The elves, the wood elves, they're always reminding them of their place in the War of the Cimmerals. But the kings of Numenor they weren't that at the time, but they were rewarded with the Isle of Numenor, and there's a very strong link to the elves. And as we go through the ages, that fades away, and those old beliefs that become superstitious, and the new reign. There's a big arc with Numenor, our sort of Atlantis. And so we wanted to have some of the colour palette and that linking and echoing what we see in Linden and of the elves in Valinor. And then there's shifts and change with colour and that. But all the scales and that came, I was looking at a drawing that I think John had done, John Howell or Alan Lee, again of the god of the sea. All the gods were Ormo and that, all part of that world. And using the scales and the seahorse and the sun were symbols of Numenor that we created. But all of that was carved in bone and sculpted and then repeated and made. So we did all the sculpting in plasticine. We had this wonderful sculptor, artist, master, and he did the wooden chest plate for Arondir, and that was all done in plasticine. And then once we did that, we could do iterations and then use technology to do repeats and sculpt and so we tried to keep the hand there as much as possible in the timelines, and then use that as a tool to then use technology to help us get it out fast.
Wow.
Yeah.
I'm obsessed with it.
Sort of like.
Well, before we turn to the audience,
and then they go, it's too heavy. And I go, there's nothing lighter than car stuff.
Well, before we turn to the question, because I know you all have a lot of questions, Final question. Why is the role of the costume designer so important on shows such as The Lord of the Rings, The Rings of Power?
It's important on every show. Every show.
It's a rhetorical question.
Sorry. I often think it's a bum deal, with modern and contemporary stuff. People go, oh, that's easy. I go, there's nothing easy about contemporary at all. And the opinions that come out that you're trying to deal with is a huge thing. But everything's a direct response and introduction to your character through the script, and you're supporting them. It's the first thing that we see, and it might be the back of a shoe, the heel of a shoe that we see, or does this character fit in their environment or not? Or again, it's everything about what you're putting on them is telling a story about them. So obviously it's important. The naked thing would be entertaining. But,
naked without us, actually.
Yeah, I don't. And when we, it's usually the first point an actor has to discovering their character. And how many times have we sat in a room together and heard the actor go, "Oh, now I found my character." And it might be one element that you're contributing or offering to them. One that you might, you can even look at a reference. Sometimes we'll have mood boards, and what I see in a mood board and what an actor, when we did Crimson Peak, I had Jessica and Tom, we had all these mood boards there, and they all saw something different that I hadn't seen. So it's an interesting thing of looking at an image and all seeing something different within that image, but it means something, and then you take that and move with it. So I think it's really, we're one of the first ports of call in supporting them and what the script do, and I think it's...
None of it would be possible without all of you.
No, not at all. It's really boring without it. No.
Well, Kate, amazing. I could talk to you until I pass out. I think that'd be embarrassing. So just get me a pillow. I would love to pass it over to the audience for a few questions. I believe there's a mic going around. So please raise your hand if you have a question. We'll come to you. All right, don't all do it at once.
That's all right.
Okay, there's some over here.
Hi, I'm Amy, newly Local 705 member, and thank you so much for being here. I'm a huge Lord of the Rings fan. Oh, thank you. My question is, did you feel when you were first approached with Rings of Power, did you feel the pressure of maybe from like fans or anything of trying to stay true to what was originally created from like Nyla Dixon's work or even your work through The Hobbit? Did you feel like you had to keep true to that world, or did you really just zone in and focus on like what you wanted to create in your mind?
No, you always, and huge respect to all those films and Nyla's work. They're amazing. But it's like watching I can't watch Macbeth, but Shakespeare, and you see a dozen iterations of them. We're always very conscious, and somehow, there's always that balance of, I remember JD and Patrick saying, can you make it familiar so it's not too drawn out? But the fact that we were in the second age allowed us to sort of look at it. But I would say we still looked at the same beginning source point for that. And I think we're all hugely respectful of all of that work that's gone on before, and great beauty when you look at it. And but I think when you go back, you have to sort of take that, and then you have to immerse yourself in what is being given to you with the script and source material there. And the fact that it was in the second age, we did know we were eventually heading that way to the third age. So over 5 seasons, I imagine there'll be a shift in things, an evolution of that. But we had to start somewhere,
right?
So to speak.
Ooh, I love that. That was exciting. Who else has a question?
Should I stand?
Sure. Stand, introduce yourself.
I'm Claire. I'm with the Carnegie Mellon group of new grads.
Oh,
right.
awesome.
We're super excited to meet you. Thank you. And I just was curious. I know, like, when my dad is a massive fan of Tolkien and also a massive fan of your work. I asked him about it this week when I was seeing him, and he was super excited that I was coming to see you.
Nice.
But
shout out to Dad.
Yeah, shout out to Dad. Shout out to Dad. But I know that when Tolkien was writing these original series, he was living in a very specific historical context and kind of writing these as an escape and as like. Creating this beautiful magical world for himself and his readers. How did it feel kind of translating that work into our current historical context and like what you feel that the modern audience needs these stories for? I think this is a bit off the hoof, but I think it's a great question. It makes you think. I think for me, my response, and it won't be what others respond to, but
having been brought up with those books, we're sort of missing some of ritual and magic in our world. It provided answers for things in our world. There's so much. I think it gives us a wonderful escape now when you look at it. I have a daughter that's frankly looking at the future in a what the fuck, and I don't mean that to be light or vulgar about it, but I think we do need to. Man has always created these legends and myths around them, and I think they're really important. And that's why I've chosen my home in a place where there's atmosphere and you can dream, and we're amazing thinkers and clever. And I think also just the shift. We had a very diverse cast to what has been seen before, and it comes back down to character. We were, what is this group of characters and what is their culture about? And we, even our Halfwits, there were so many different people in that, but when you united them all, they just looked like they were meant to be Halfwits, in my opinion. They had a common language in that, so that didn't really apply. But I think there is a need for us to bring magic back into the everyday. Would be what I would say, and what I notice when you're doing a more gritty version of things, or where it's more magical things, the things that are ordinary become extraordinary. And I'm always looking at that. You can stand at a bus stop and see a whole bunch of suits lined up, but there's magic in the repetition and things like that. And I feel that's a very baseline of what you've answered. But I think from that to fantasy, it's the way you look at things. And I think we need to look at things as a way of embracing that quality. I like it. Yeah. I'm a dreamer.
And it goes without saying, but the diversity and the people gain these roles for projects like Rings of Power is so crucial. And I hope that the industry continues to go in that direction, because it really was something beautiful.
Well, and we just keep coming back down to character and what is there for the character.
Right.
That's the most important thing.
I'm not sure how many questions we got.
Hi, my name is Lindley.
Hi, Lindley.
Hi. Thank you so much for coming literally around the world to meet with us. This is amazing for everyone, I'm sure. I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit about the process of getting hired on this project, and if it was a different experience than other productions you've worked on.
Very much a different experience. I think in some ways, because I'd done some work before, with Guillermo and with Peter, and that wasn't always of benefit, as far as I know of the process. But it was a series of interviews, and I think everyone who came to this project had the same. It took place over months, the sort of interview process, and it was just sort of, I think my name was, I don't know how my name got in the hat, but it sort of happened like that. But it just became a series of interviews, and we got to know each other. I got to meet Patrick and JD, so there's a sort of bit of phone flirting. You're getting, it's a very intimate relationship working with directors or showrunners, and that I sort of always liken it to a first date, but then sort of a little bit. Well? I didn't take my clothes off. No. Sorry. No, but it's getting. You have to have a trust thing. You're working very quickly and fast, and I don't know. I'm a person who I am, and this is who I am. So for both people, you need to feel comfortable about that, because you're having to get to the core of things pretty fast. And I like to be in a world where you can be open, respectful, but open, and go, I wear my heart on my sleeve quite a lot, not always a good thing, but, it was getting to know them. And, I was excited by what they were telling me, the sort of wilder version of, the place. And, it's such a shift from the world that I had known. So I thought, there's something new here. But it was just involved a series of talks and discussions and secrecy and, and lots of vetting, lots of meeting people. So, and all you could do really, which was interesting, it was talk about, the passion you have for the material. And I think that's what united everyone who came to it. And my crew, I had a lot of crew that had worked on the trilogy before. And from Weta, I had Daniel Falconer and Matt Appleton doing the armour, and they, that was a unique, like going to Mars, it was the most amazing journey they had. And I guess they were interested in revisiting that world in a different context. They were really open to ideas, but it was lovely to have that. So I guess we were all, this is not an answer to your answer, but it was that process of having people around you to always sort of question and things. And I think JD and Patrick did the same.
Wow. Very inspirational. Let's see. Do we have time for a few more? You all stop me when we're Time to wrap.
Hi, my name
Hi.
is Eleanor. It's lovely to meet you.
You
I'm also
too.
with the senior grads and graduate students, and it's been,
Yeah.
thank you so much. We're really excited. This has been really inspiring. So something that I found really interesting is that because this is a prequel series, it almost feels like it's a period piece, but for fantasy. So I wanted to ask you, I know.
That's probably a great observation. yeah.
Thank you. What I thought was so fun is that you don't have, because it's a made up world, you don't have outside sources to go from besides the actual text, the previous films. So I wanted to ask you, what was your process to do the research? How much time did you have? How did you do the research?
I could sit forever in the world of research until someone says, "Oh, I've got to get something made." Now I've got to commit. It's been money. I think it's a world I knew, so I knew where to leap off already. But I think when you look at all those influences that Tolkien had and the world of, the mythologies and that, and you see it in art and you see it in film, there's the expressionist film with the Nibelung and all of that. You sort of have all these references, and I know the boys wanted to ground it in reality, but you still, it's sort of how do you make it poetic as well? And I think it's just, after looking at lots of things, there's been so much fan artwork and that have taken, I've seen Lord of the Rings almost like a manga style bromance, like there's been, but there's so much art out there and it's hard to not get lost in it. So I kept coming back to the core and I kept looking at statues and art and film, the original, folk tales and things like that. And that's how the Green Man found his way into Arendir's, their relationship to the trees and things and, Ents and all of that world. So I just kept coming back to, we were trying to do something quite classical in a way that wouldn't, I think you can say that of the trilogy, that it was very classical as well. But then now there's so many things that, you look at so many things, you go, oh, that's almost a version of another elf or, this has become its own language in itself, hasn't it? So it's sort of, how do you roll back a little bit to start again?
So the limit does not exist on research.
Yeah. Oh yeah. No, always. But then soak it up and then spit it out and then start.
Yeah. Any others? Oh, excited over here.
Hi, my name's Aaron, and I'm with my girlfriend, who's
Congratulations.
So I'm actually an econ major. So I'm just with my girlfriend who's from FIDM, and she just got into the costume design program at FIDM, and she's really excited, and she wants to work in the industry in the future. So I was wondering, what advice would you give to her to get connected in the industry and maybe get like an intern?
Maybe people here would answer that well for here, I think. But I'd say from the colleagues I know, we've all found our own journey and they've all been very different. I started in opera and theatre and found my way into film that way. And I certainly, there was no costume design specific course for me at the time when I was studying, but I did do a postgraduate at Motley and I trained I had to go and do a qualification that earned money, supposedly. It's my parents. So there was a graphic design course and I spent a year airbrushing giant Mars bars, which was really uninspiring.
It's relatable.
But it did teach. I tell you what, I got out of that though. It's interesting. So I think sometimes not the direct path is quite an interesting one. We had to do typesetting, and this is in the day where you didn't have computers. I think computers came in my last, shut up, I'm so old. Came up in I can't even see anymore. Came in my last year at school. Long time ago, and we had to hand typeset. So we'd get little letters and little bits of tape, and we'd have to lie out all the words like a newspaper and do our own typesetting. But weirdly, I think that really trained my eye to look at negative space and look at things in a different way. Funny enough, it was the typesetting and calligraphy in that world. It was nothing
Whatever
to do
you
with
gotta
costume.
do,
But also, my love of going to museums and that's not about a direct path, but your journey just sometimes. I don't know, I love the fact that I'd tried lots of different things and started in theatre. It gave me a really good, solid place and it really grounded me in the script and supporting the character and a process. And, Motley gave me a process that I'll be forever grateful for. And we were lucky we had people like Mike Lee and Jocelyn Herbert, Samuel Beckett's designer, came and taught us, and they all brought different things. So I think it's, as you go along, it's taking things from different people. The reality of trying to get work experience and find yourself in work, it's different everywhere you are. And some places are more rigid. You know, when I was starting out, I'd go and paint sets at English National Opera. I'd do night shift there while I was studying, or, you know, but I learned stuff from painting sets that I take into the world of costume and that. And I did so much for nothing. One deal I did with a designer in London, I did some work with him at the Royal Opera House, and he said, "Oh, I can't pay you." You know, he worked at the Royal Opera House. And so we did a deal that I do as model making, and he'd take me to Venice. So I went to Venice for 2 weeks, and that was worth every payment. And I was in this world of mist and violinist players. It was magic. So I'd just say, you know, be prepared to give up something if it's possible to get the experience. And every experience is a valid thing. And, you know, I've done all sorts of shitty jobs for a long time before it was anything near to paying a mortgage.
Yeah, they call it a journey for a reason.
Yeah, but you learn, nothing's wasted if you're doing it. And I think crossing over is quite interesting. But, you know, in my world, we're not. It's hard though, because sometimes people want to pigeonhole you. And I remember I had an agent at a time, because I also, you know, designed sets and things when I, you know, work in opera and that. And she said, "Oh, you've kind of got to choose whether it's costume design or set design." And I think at the time, I went, "Oh, costume." And I remember lots of production designers, and I go, "Oh, I'm so lucky I don't have to work with actors." but you know, it's sort of, but all of it is the sum of all the parts and makes you an individual. And I think looking at work and how you bring what your language is and developing that is a really important thing as part of it. But I don't know enough about working here, because it seems like there's more of a system and a tier, and sometimes people get really, you know, they do like to pigeonhole you, even in terms of, I found that a struggle sometimes with the film work. You know, if you do something like Edge of Tomorrow, everyone goes, "Oh, you're the robot girl." And I'm going, "Oh, you know, I love that, but not forever." And, you know, so, and I think we're taught, as a costume designers, we serve the script and we adapt our language to that. So this whole idea of pigeonholing us is just something that gets a little bit frustrating at times, I think. Right. I think our skill sets are that, you know, you tell us what you want, what pizza do you want to make, we'll make that pizza for you, is the short term of it. So, you know, yeah.
Is that it for questions? Oh, you have one. Anna.
I'm Anna.
Hi, Anna.
So we have a lot of 892 and 705 members.
Yes.
So I think it's really important, and I have to ask, tell us about your team, because it takes so many people.
They're amazing.
Yeah, and how big is your team? And
oh, okay. It depends on the project. So I think I had a team of 15 core on Crimson Peak, and then we outsource stuff. So it depends on how you're going to tackle the project. But I love my crew, and I have to say I've enjoyed wonderful crews here. When I can see Barbara there, hello Barbara, when we worked together. And on Rings of Power, I got a chance to work with people I'd worked with before, and they were chosen for what they contribute and the talent they have. It's all about process. The idea is just the beginning. The sketch is just an initial thing, but how do you keep that intention and skill going throughout? So everyone, there's a lot of play when I work with my crew. I love to play, and I love to see what's offered back up, and everyone does that beautifully. We probably, on Rings of Power, we started small, and then it went to about a core team of about 70, and then it went to 120 at one point. But, you know, sometimes we had 4 weeks to do something, so those numbers had to go up to get things out. But, you know, the relationship between them all, you know, we had armourers, prop makers, the textile department I love playing in the world of textiles, but that linked to breakdown, and it linked to what our cutters and that were doing. So there's a lot of playing between departments, and that's why I love working in a workroom situation that you're creating, because stuff was outsourced and beautifully done and brought back, but that special alchemy you have when you have a group working together and throwing things around and making quick decisions, and because it was quite organic at times with speed and that, it was everyone were able to offer and contribute, and amazing craftsmen. You know, I can't do that work. In fact, they often went, "Can you not touch that?" And I think here I'm actually not allowed to touch it. So and the cutters were, you know, everyone was chosen for different things that they brought to it. But it's an amazing range of people, and you know, they've had years of experience and excellence doing what they do, and I do listen to them, and it's exciting when you can have that collaboration. And we couldn't have done it without them. And I doubt, they worked too long hours. Sometimes you're really concerned about the health of your crew. Sorry, I get a little bit frustrated these days about how people are worked.
Right. Yeah, I mean, a costume designer is nothing without their team,
Yeah,
and it
when you're
depends on all
asking
of you.
people, it's fine, asking people to work, but when they're working 5 and then 7 days a week endlessly, it's not just the short term now of, we know there's going to be 6 weeks of a bit fudge. Now it seems to be the norm. And those people have families and things, and they keep working. And I don't think it should always be rewarded. They need to be paid accordingly for that and rewarded. And I think that's a huge part of it. Yeah. So I love my crew.
And with that, I think that was a perfect place to end. Please give it up for Kate Hawley.
Thank you.